Next, we're going to look at the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem only works for right triangles, so there needs to be a 90-degree angle. And it says that the sum of the squares of the legs is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So the A and the B, those could be switched. They just have to be the two legs, but the C must be the hypotenuse. And remember that the hypotenuse is the side that is opposite of the 90-degree angle. So we're going to be using this equation, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So let's start with just a quick one to plug in and practice using the formula before we try a word problem. So we've got our formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In this question, I'm just giving you the values for a, b, and c, although I could also give you a picture. I could give you a picture that looked like this, and I'd have 6, 8, and C. So I'm going to plug in the values that I have. The A value is 6, the B value is 8, and I don't know C. I'm going to be solving for C. So when I solve an equation, my first steps are to simplify what I can first. So I can do 6 squared is 36, and I can do 8 squared is 64. And then I can combine my like terms, and I end up with 100 equals c squared. And then recently, we learned that the inverse of squaring is square rooting. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and the square root of c squared is plus or minus c. And on the left-hand side, the square root of 100 is 10. Remember, this is really two separate equations. It's c equals 10, that's one of my answers, and it's also negative 1 times c equals 10, and I would divide both sides by negative 1, and I'd get c equals negative 10. So my two answers are plus or minus 10 equals c. Now, in this specific problem, though, c is a length. Like if they didn't give us a unit, but let's say these were centimeters. I wouldn't measure the side of a triangle and say that it's negative 10 centimeters long. So for this case, the negative number doesn't make sense. There's no such thing as a negative distance. So in this case, we're only going to end up having the positive value. All right, next let's try a word problem. An 18-foot ladder is leaned against a building so that the bottom of the ladder is 8 feet from the base of the building. Okay, so here's my building. Here's my ladder. And the base of the ladder is 8 feet away from the base of the building. How far up the building does the ladder reach? So I want to know how far this is. Oh, and then I missed the ladder is 18 feet long. So we usually, when they build buildings, they make them perpendicular to the ground, except for the Leaning Tower of Pisa. That's not something they do too often. So we are going to assume that that's a right angle. And then our two legs would be the 8 and the x, and our hypotenuse would be the 18. So we're going to use our a squared plus b squared equals c squared formula. One of the legs was 8. The other leg we don't know, so we're going to solve for that. And the hypotenuse was 18. So we're going to square what we can. We've got 8 squared is 64. I can simplify that. 18 squared is 324. And remember, before I can take the square root of both sides, I have to have the squared object by itself. So at this point, the next thing I'll do is subtract 64 from both sides so that I can isolate the b squared, and I get b squared equals 260. And now I can take the square root of both sides, and the square root of b squared is plus or minus b. The square root of 260, this is one that doesn't work out nice, so I have to do a prime factorization. The prime factorization of 260 is 2 times 2 times 5 times 13. So 2 squared times 5 times 13. And the square root of 2 squared is just 2. I'm going to come up over here and write plus or minus b equals 2 times the square root. Now I still have the 5 and the 13 that didn't simplify when I took the square root. So 5 times 13, that's 65. And then I would divide both sides by plus or minus 1 and you'd get plus or minus 2 root 65. Remember that in this case, b is a distance, and it doesn't make sense to have a negative distance. So really we only have one answer. b equals positive 2 root 65 feet. And oftentimes in word problems, if I say something is 2 root 65 feet, you really have no idea how long that is. So a lot of times we will actually estimate these. So we'll go ahead and we'll put 2 root 65 into our calculator, and we'll get approximately 16.12 feet.